Hiya, thank you for having me today. My name's Ellie and I'm a fourth year undergraduate from Nottingham, and I wanted to talk to you today about the findings from my research project, really looking at, do farmers notice pain in calves, do they use NSAIDs, and if not, why? So let's look at the background before we dive in. Despite industry effort, mortality in calves has been static over the last couple of years at 5%. And this has been indicated by Bobby Hyde as shown on screen. Pre-weaning calf mortality, however, costs our industry $11.6 million per year. And as we can see, that's an awful lot of money, which I'd much rather spend elsewhere improving welfare. The two biggest issues facing our calves are respiratory disease and diarrhoea. A study by Baxter-Smith looked at whether farmers had experienced these diseases within the last 2 years, and it showed that no matter what sector they were in, they had experienced them. And this is shown on the graphs on screen. If I can get this laser to work, we can see that the light green shows mortality. The issues are associated with mortality, but also future performance through survival, growth rates, and milk yield. Previous research highlights improved cure rates and outcomes when it comes to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, for short, NSAIDs, when these are incorporated into SOPs. And our short-term benefits include faster recovery times, reduced signs of pain, and therefore an improvement in welfare, but also help future production through improved growth rates. So, I've set the scene now, so let's move on to the interesting part, which is my research. So, let's look at if farmers use NSAIDs or not. So we split this study into two sections. The first section was involved in the quantitative data, which we used an online study to look at the likelihood of treating calves within 8 specific scenarios. And these scenarios, we also looked at generic calf foot diseases. And the responses were recorded on a scale 1 to 5, in terms of the likelihood of using NSAIDs as part of a treatment protocol. And to be honest, I was absolutely overwhelmed with the response rate, with 896 viable respondents from vets, consultants and farmers. And these were from the USA, the UK and Europe, so I was quite shocked by that, to be honest. Looking at this a little bit more. So this isn't going to be the main talk of mine today, but I did want to highlight it before I moved on. If we look at the UK vet and farmer response rate with regards to respiratory disease and diarrhoea, we can see that on this graph, the orange bar shows when respondents would always use NSAIDs as part of an SOP, and the blue bar shows when respondents are likely to use NSAIDs as part of an SOP. And we can see that vets and farmers roughly agree when it comes to diarrhoea. However, less than 50% are likely to use NSAIDs as part of a diarrhoea treatment protocol. However, the picture is more promising when it comes to respiratory disease, and farmers are actually more proactive than vets when it comes to this, with 75% of farmers including an NSAID as part of a respiratory disease treatment protocol. So, these 3 scenarios shown on the screen were taken forward into part 2 of the project, and this table highlights our respondents from the online survey. Here we can see that the respondents were converted into a yes answer to include the always and often, or a no to include the sometimes, rarely and never. And there are discrepancies between vets and farmers, and ultimately this is what I wanted to find more about. Why do we have these discrepancies? So, part 2 of the project. This is going to take up the majority of my talk today, as it's the area I'm really interested in. But what did we do? So section 2, we conducted a series of online focus groups, which were semi-structured, and we used 3 videos, which were on the previous slide. And these videos were shown 3 times, and when we discussed them in turn to look at why people wanted to use NSAIDs, what we thought of the case, and just general, we had a little bit of a chat about it. And these transcripts were then cleaned, and a thematic analysis was performed, which was a method described by Braun and Clark. And then we also double-coded 2 of the thematic transcripts, and a thematic map was created. But let's dive into the actual nitty-gritty of this. The overarching themes. Our main themes identified were the motivators and the barriers, and these interacted with each other to affect the clinical signs seen, and ultimately the decision to use NSAIDs or not. And this really affects animal welfare on farm. Looking at the motivators individually, the motivators centred around farmers really wanting to do the right thing for their calves, as the calves responded positively to treatment. This has positive welfare implications and production outcomes. This did result in an economic return on investment. However, it was also felt that NSAID played a role in social responsibility and antimicrobial stewardship. Other motivators included ease of access of treatment on farm, which increased the chance of NSAID use. If we looked at the barriers identified the value of the calf on different systems, how this met the farm business model and its priorities. The ease of treatment on the ground by the staff delivering the treatment, as well as the priorities of the young stock people on farm, did add barriers to the situation. However, as we previously mentioned in the previous talk, education was one of our biggest barriers identified through this study, and I'm going to talk about this later. However, before we break down the barrier of education, I just wanted to really sing the praises. So, on screen there are 3 quotes from vets and farmers which demonstrate the role of welfare on farm, and the fact that welfare was a major motivator to the use of NSAIDs on farm, as the fact the calves got better. And I think this is a brilliant thing. And it was also an overwhelming feeling that calves came first, and it was stated that NSAIDs were really common practice, particularly on those farms which engaged positively with their vets, but also the wider farming community and resources. However, there is a flip side to this, and calves do play different roles on different farms, and different farms do have different priorities. And in some cases, calves are lower down the pecking order, and in these cases, they may not always receive the prompt treatment due to a thinking that it might not be worth the investment. And some quotes relating to this thinking and potentially explaining it and shown on screen. This is where we need to really tackle, and education plays a major role in tackling this. And if we educate people, they can make informed treatment decisions. Ultimately, that's what we'd like to see. So let's break it down. When we look at education, this is an area we can make a massive difference in, and I'm really pleased to be able to share this with this room today, because ultimately a lot of you in here are the people that's going to implement this on the ground. We look at 4 key sub-themes: the awareness of effect, stewardship, decision-making, and improvement of knowledge. Awareness effect describes a concept surrounding the implementation of NSAIDs in a treatment protocol, how they work, and what are the benefits of using them. Stewardship. Through this research, it was identified that there was a bit of confusion between the difference between a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug and an antibiotic. And there was also confusion about the appropriate use and decreasing use of antibiotics. And there is a bit of ambiguity here, which we need to address. It was also felt that some people just had an antibiotic bias. They wouldn't look at NSAIDs, they just reach for the antibiotic straight away. And again, it's this bias we need to correct through education. Decision-making was all about empowering the farm staff with the right knowledge to make the right decision on farm and implementing SOPs. Improving knowledge. It was felt that there was a lack of industry support and drive, and a lack of want to improve knowledge as an industry. And it was identified that there was a growing calf rearing industry and a want and desire from calf rearers for further qualifications, much like we see in foot trimming and AI. And with regards to NSAIDs use in particular, there was also a push for a greater knowledge-based approach and further support, guidance and incentives, with a suggestion this could come from farm assurance schemes. I think I've rattled through this, but I hope you've understood most of what I said. In conclusion, it was clear that farmers really cared about their calves, and they were keen to use methods to increase animal welfare, and NSAIDs are seen as a massive part of that, because ultimately, if you've got a headache, you take a paracetamol. Farmers saw no negative impacts of using NSAIDs, and we can see there is a greater drive for their use. However, there are barriers which stand in their way at both an industry and a farm level, and we need to break these barriers down to further enable NSAID use and improve calf welfare on farm. At a farm level, these barriers are a lack of confidence and competence in the staff, a lack of ability to change habits, and the priorities of the young stock people on the ground and the relationship with your vet. At an industry level, we see a want from farmers for further education, a disambiguation around the role of NSAIDs, and ensuring the costs are covered within the supply chain, as we sometimes don't see the upward progression. And there's also a suggestion that farm assurance schemes could play a role in this, with further implementation of NSAID usage and education. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you for you all to listening to me today, and to the AWF for supporting me through this project and ultimately enabling me to do this. And this is just a fantastic quote, I think, which came out from our research, and really, where are we going to be in the next 10 to 20 years, and what we do now is going to affect that. So thank you for listening to me today. If you do have any questions, please come up to me at lunch. I'm more than happy to answer them, because this is an area I'm really interested in. So thank you.